So that's me, Jorge Gonzalez. You know, we have a volcano now in my close to where I live. This is the Canary Islands where I live. I live here in this big island called Tenerife, and we have the volcano there in La Palma. I have family there. Nobody is affected yet, but you know that that landed pretty close to where I'm living. So just in case you want that, you have that curiosity, well, this is happening here. Spain is here in the mainland, so this is a small archipelago of islands there, far away from Europe, but we are still Europe. So we have a volcano now in Europe. That's for your information. And I work as a CakePHP developer and project manager in at Cake Development Corporation, and do training there in Cake Software Foundation. And well, I try to contribute in plugins and open source and mostly. And well, today I'm going to be hosting the first workshop. We're going to talk about useful stuff, right? You can apply this to your projects. You can reuse or take those ideas as the seed to work or do something similar in your own projects, hopefully uh, improving the security of your CakePHP applications and improving the performance of your CakePHP applications. So we're going to talk about the middlewares and events as well, specifically middlewares because they are going to be used a lot in the security and caching areas or topics. So we are going to talk about them first in case you're not familiar with it. I usually try to keep the contents of the workshop at a basic or basic to intermediate level. So anybody who is new to the framework can take something out of this workshop, especially if it is your first application or you just joined the community and you want to understand maybe some other features of the project that you're not using right now. Okay, so that's kind of the plan, right? Again, I'm sure that I might be over prepared contents. So some of the slides are marked as optional. If I have some time in here, some timing plan here. If I see we are not gonna get to till the end, I'm gonna skip some of these slides. But I promise if we skip slides, I promise that I'm gonna wrap all this content into a training session and organize a training session through training.cakephp.org for the next week or next week. Okay, so if you think it's interesting, we can keep covering those contents in deep in a future training session. Okay, so first thing is to set up a development environment. I have my terminal here. You see, we are going to use this project. This project has several branches. You can check those branches later if you want. For now, for your information, the master branch is just the initial skeleton of the project, and then I uploaded a database schema like this one, and I uploaded some utilities like a Docker Compose file for setting up a Postgre database and PHP container, and well, some other stupid utilities just to don't type too much over the training session today, and that's it. It's a plain composer create project project right from the start. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just clone the project as you could do in your own machine. I get there and git clone this into CakeFest 2021. Then I'm gonna go to CakeFest 2021. And well, this is the project. So the next thing is I'm gonna start my development environment using Docker Compose up this way. Well, that's a lot of noise. I usually like to keep the logs there somewhere just in case there are errors. but obviously not. This is not going to be critical today. Hopefully, we will not have errors. Haha. So once we get there, again, see this is the project. Let me know if you don't see my screen correctly, or if I need to do changes to the font. Let me get some water. And we can keep going. Usually start an IDE. You can use whatever IDE you like. I usually use this one, which is PHP Storm at work, but we are not affiliated or endorsing PHP Storm. You can use VI or NetBeans or Visual Studio Code, whatever is good. Once we get the project set up, you can see, okay, I understand that most of you are going to be familiar with Docker Compose. If you are not familiar with Docker Compose, that is going to be a little bit out of the scope of the first workshop today. But just for you to know, we just started 2 containers. If you take a look at this configuration, we just started a Postgre 13. Version 14 is out, but I'm using 13 for this one. And PHP Nginx container using PHP 8. Okay, then you can use the environment to configure the containers. In this case, the relevant configuration we have is this one, which is basically hooking the database URL to define the driver name, define the user and the password, define the name of the host, in this case, the port, and the name of the database. If you see, this configuration here is going to be injected into my application through the environment. If you go to your application, app.php configuration, you will see this, sorry, to your app, data sources, it's gonna be, it's gonna be in app local. Yeah, should be there. You will see around here, if you generate a local, well, the missing piece is we are looking at the code too early, because after setting up the Docker Compose, the next thing I need to do is to use composer install to install all dependencies and generate a local configuration for my project. How can we do this? Well, I usually prepare some utility like this, or define an alias, because I end up typing this a lot. So usually, basically, I don't like to. So I'm gonna do dk and get inside of the container. You can see here, I am inside of the container because PHP is version 8, but outside my regular standard PHP version is 7.4 right now. So I go back to my container, and obviously all the files are shared, all the contents are available for me there, and the next thing I need to do is use composer install. Running composer install will pull all the CakePHP dependencies, create the app local file, and tweak, create some temporary folders, tweak the permissions, usual stuff, right? So now we have a new app local, and I can continue explaining that this file here will have a section for your data sources, this one, that will override your data source using a URL. If you map this URL with the configuration you just generated here, basically everything up there is ignored, and you pick the URL configuration from the DSN that we pass as a parameter. So that's it. I'll keep going then. Casey, question is, what OS are you using? Eric, you don't need to raise your hand. Just post your question in there in the chat so I can read it. I am using Ubuntu 20 with XF CE. window manager, and but Ubuntu 20 basically. Any, but the idea of using Docker will be that you can set this up in any operating system. So if you're in Windows or if you're in Mac, I know Windows and Docker, they have a history together, but if you're in Mac and Docker should work fine. So if you have any problem setting up this environment you're in your own machine, just let me know and we can work together to fix it. Okay. But for now, if we recap, now we have now we have a blank CakePHP application skeleton. We have a PostgreSQL database set up, and we have a PHP 8 and Nginx container set up as well. You can see all those using Docker compose PS like this. You see we have CakePHP, we have Postgre, and these are the ports. These are the ports you're looking for. So then, if you see, we are redirecting port 8099 to 4080. So next thing we can see is our CakePHP application working on localhost 8099. You can use whatever port you want, and yeah, you can see here that this is the welcome page, CakePHP latest. Well, 4.3 is release candidate already, but we are using 4.2. Then we are using, well, all the things, right? It's kind of working. You have debug enable. Hopefully you can see all the screen. Also the debug toolbar. If you cannot see that, maybe you can do it a little bit better, a little bit smaller this way. Oops. Let me move this around a little bit. Okay, possibly that is gonna look better. Okay, good, awesome. So we have something working. So the next thing would be, after setting up a development environment, we can initialize the database. I'm just distributing an example database that we used last year in CakeFest 2020, which is a very simple files, users, groups, and tags related database. It is basically a playground for today. So we don't care too much about the contents of this database, but we just need something to play with, right? So if you see, we are distributing the project with an InitDB shell. You can quickly check, and basically we are just sending everything to the Postgre container like this. And we have something now, right? If you want to take a look at the tables, you can basically put it this way. No. You can do it this way. D on PSQL, and there you have all the tables, right? We have files, we have groups, we have tagged, we have tags, and we have users. And we have some associations like files that belongs to groups, sorry, users belongs to many groups. Then we have an association through tagged, so users can generate tags to anything, to other users or to files, right? Well, just a basic schema that we can use to play with, right? Good. So next thing would be bake everything as we do, just to have the files. Let me go there to the container. Bean, cake, bake all, everything. And bake everything here. Yeah, overwrite everything. We shouldn't have it. Possibly mistake. Okay, and bake everything. So if you go back here, you will see now we have some controllers. We have files controller, groups controller, tag controller, and so forth, right? If you go to your application, that should kind of work now. If you go to groups, you will see a group, name one. If you go to users, you will see a user, right? All fake data, example, everything clear and easy, so we can just start baking, right? Good. Hopefully no questions so far, but if you have any questions, I think there was a raised hand before, but I don't know if that was a real question or not. Hopefully not, because I don't see anything in the chat. Good. So first thing we are going to talk today about is middlewares. So we're gonna explain a little bit how to create a middleware. Again, I'm gonna try not to be very verbose on concepts um, or just introduction to those classes because I think we should be practical today. And but meanwhile, I will try to explain or give you some mental reference when you're dealing with your own middleware, especially if you're new to the concept, so you know what's going on, right? Um, let's make a new middleware. Okay. First, let's see what middlewares are you using right now in your application. You go to your application, the middlewares are defined or could be defined in several places. Well, not several, just two places. You have middlewares that can, well, actually more, because you can define middlewares inside your own plugins. But as a standard regular application, you will see middlewares defined here in the application class. If you go to the application class, there is a specific function, middleware. This function will allow you to configure all the middlewares you want to use and all your requests. So you have here your middleware queue configuration, and you are basically adding middlewares in order, meaning when the request goes down, every middleware will be able to affect the request going down and the response going up. So every request you send to your CakePHP application will go through all those middlewares down. So for example, the routing middleware, it will be able to affect the request that the body parser, the CSRF protection, and your controller will see. At the end here, your controller kicks in, right? So then the routing middleware as well, if this could be useful at all, will be able to affect the response that is returned up. So every middleware will have two places. One place to affect the request going down, one place to affect the response going up, right? So middlewares are very useful to add features to your application that are not related with any controller, features that depend on the request and the response, features that are generic for all the requests of your application. And also another place you can attach those middlewares to is through the routing. If you go to your routes configuration here, config routes, you will be able to define and attach middlewares to specific routes. We're going to see an example about this in a bit. Okay. So for now, let's say we want to create a new middleware and see what the thing is going to do. And in this case, going back to the console, from inside my container, I'm going to bake a middleware. This is bean cake, bake, middleware. And it's going to be a profiler, middleware, profiler. Good. We have a new class here created. You go to the code, you will see there is some new middleware, profiler middleware. If you click there, you will see a pretty empty class, right? So this class has only one method, process. And the idea about this method is when you call handle, you pass down the request and you get a response. And then at the end of the method, you return the response, right? So here you can alter the response. And here you can alter the request. So that's it. So how could we build an example? Well, let's see if we want to store the timing of the requests, we could attach a new header to the current request. Sorry, to the response in this case, and save the time that the request is basically using. In this case, let me let's say we want to record the start here. That would be micro time, true. And then, well, at the end, we will return, we will record the stop. That will be micro time as well. And we want to attach this to the response because the request time will be with header. Let's say we name the header as X response time. Okay. And we are going to do basically stop, start, and multiply, because this is milliseconds. If we multiply by 1000, it's going to be seconds, right? So that's it. Now this is a very stupid middleware, but basically allowing us to understand the concepts. The request is not changed. We are not injecting anything to the request, but we could add an attribute, for example, and say, okay, with attribute start time, and well, let me name it correctly, start time, and I could pass start, right? And this will right. So the rest of the middlewares down the queue will be able to pull this attribute, which is something similar to what the authentication middleware does. When the authentication middleware processes the authentication, it will inject an attribute. So the rest of the stack will have a visible attribute that they can pick. And the request is available in many places in your application, for example, at the controller level, but also at the view level. So you can pull that attribute in many places and use it whenever it's needed. Then the same for the response. The response, you will be able to attach headers or modify the body. Well, a number of things that you can do on the response for like a generic response for all your middlewares. So this way we will get something. Well, the next step would be we need to tell Cake to use that middleware. You need to go to your application and add your middleware somewhere, right? Like for example here, why not? I'm going to add a new profiler middleware like this. Okay, and we're good to go. So in this case, when you get back to your console, let me open another one here. We can do curl dash HTTP localhost 8099, and we get an X response time of 7, which is 7 milliseconds, right? Good. So we have a way to attach anything to the request and response for all the requests in our application, which is fine. But also another feature of the middlewares is they have compatibility through the different PSR standards, 7, 15, etc. And we can get and use external middlewares from other frameworks or projects. There is a reference, let me show you there. There are some references that you can follow here with different middlewares, right? You can use your own projects right away. And as an I want to do this. And as an example, we are going to use one of them. For example, this one, the server timing middleware. So you can see someone else already had this idea of creating a server timing middleware, like, well, better than the one we did in 1 minute. So we can do this and use the middleware in our application. You can go there, composer require it. And once we have it, we can go back to our application and use the middleware. In this case, is the name of server timing middleware. So we can add it here as well. Add the new server timing middleware. There we are. So how is this going to work? Where this is going to work actually better with Chrome. Here we go to localhost 8099. You're going to see in the Chrome developer tools, if you go to your request, so this request, you're actually going to see a timing tab, and going there, you see, well, a better or more comprehensive timing detected by the middleware. You can configure this middleware. You can use other middlewares. We're going to use a couple middlewares. Yeah, I see some questions here. Is it wise to access database at middleware? Yes, why not? If you need a database, if you need to do a query, that is totally okay to access the database layer at that point. You have it available. You can do load model from the middleware, and load model users, find where anything you need, and then grab the data and inject it. Actually, the authentication middleware is doing that, because it will need to check your username and password in the database. So yes, it's not a problem at all, right? And yes, it is wise. So then, could you paste those links? Okay, yeah, that's let me get there. Okay, I think I don't need Chrome anything else in the session today, so I'm gonna get rid of it. Then, yeah, there it is. Copy, pasting the links, and I think we had another one that I'm gonna paste right now. This one. There are other, oh, a block, not now. There are other places where you can get additional middlewares. This is just a collection of some of them, right? And we are actually going to use Honeypot, if I remember correctly, later on, which is not here. Okay, doesn't matter. Well, there you have the links, right? Okay, going back there, we have that's a very short introduction to middlewares, because we are going to use a couple now dealing with security, and I wanted you to be aware if you were not, and hopefully now that you are aware of easy applications of middlewares, you will be using those in your projects. There is a Q&A. Is this LIFO or FIFO middleware stack? It is first in, first out. Let me check that. So this middleware, as you add middlewares, they get in. So I guess it will be first in, first out, because when you send a request to the middleware queue, it will hit the profiler middleware, the first one, and then the server timing middleware when going down. And then when the response is created, all the middlewares from bottom to the top will have a chance to alter the request. Okay. Hopefully that answers your question, Daniel. I'm gonna flag it as answer live. Then if I was not able to answer your question, just ask me again. Another thing. You can change the order of the middleware. Yes, you can change it. And actually, you have also a way to attach middleware, or you can tweak, for example, attaching a middleware after another one, or reordering the middleware sometimes. If you end up in a situation where you get into this kind of trouble, like oh, I need a middleware, but then I need another one, but and then I need another one in the middle of these two, I would advise that you rethink about the structure of your middlewares, because maybe those dependencies are yeah. As you say, Juan Pablo, this is necessary in plugins, because sometimes you want to add a middleware at the top, or you want to add a middleware before some other middleware. But in your main application, if you're dealing with this kind of issues, right, exactly, or after authentication, right, because you need to have the user ID, right, and you need to operate with an authenticated user, right. That those are very good examples that sometimes you need to deal with the order of the queue. And in your application, if you design middlewares to depend on previews or middlewares before and after, and this is causing you trouble, maybe you should revise the design of those middlewares, because the middlewares should do one thing and do it correctly, in my opinion, and they should be as light as possible to archive one objective, and not doing a lot of things or adding a lot of dependencies for others, because then you will have all these kind of dependencies that you need to manage, right? There is another question from Casey. In this example of a profile middleware, would the profiler mark the start and the beginning of the request, and the stop the start at the beginning of the request, and then which would give a total? Yes, exactly. That is what it does. If you go here, you see the start happens before the response handling occurs. So anything happening in the rest of the stack will happen between these two times. So I think the request we had was seven milliseconds. So in 7 milliseconds, you will be processing this request down to all these other middlewares, including your controller, including the time to render your view layer, and then back through all these middlewares to the profiler middleware, and then you get to this line right after, right? And then you have the chance to alter the response, right? So for example, if we go to a page which should be slower, like instead of the home page, which is a static template, we could try the user's index. Then the user's index is slower, right? We have 33 milliseconds because we need to access the database basically and bring all those users in a query and well do other things in the interim. So this is going to be slower than just providing a template and some checks, right? Good. Let's keep going because I have to tell you I'm already over. I'm already bad in my timing. So security. I'm aiming in this section, hopefully less than an hour. I'm aiming to show you. Well, first, if you have additional questions about middlewares, I'm very happy to answer or chat with you about them. All the members of the community as well. Just leave this conversation for Slack so I can cover at least some basics in security and some basics in performance and caching and the event system. Okay. So the idea behind the security topic today was to show you some of the most commonly used attacks based on the OWASP page. You go there and take a look at it. And let me keep pasting those links so you can have a reference there in the chat. You there will see a list of attacks, and then they gather the top 10. They have it, I think, in the homepage. They have this project, OWASP top 10, where you can actually see the most commonly security risks they detect for web applications and how they change over time from in the last 10 years, right? So today, like the number one thing would be broken access control or cryptographic failures, injection. I'm going to cover some of these typical attack vectors, show you how they look like and and the features in the framework you can use to mitigate or reduce the exposure of those attack vectors in your application. Security is always a moving target, and there is no application 100% secure. But at least if you see something like this in your application right now, you will hopefully it will ring a bell. Like, I could be exposed to whatever kind of attack, right? Let's harden this a little bit. So, bots. I'm putting bots number one because this is annoying, very frustrating. I don't know if you had this experience, like you publish your application live. Okay, there is another question. I've used for insert a log record in the database. Oh yeah, okay. That's okay. But some people is using middlewares for login, like the current user, it's the current user methods, etc. Yeah. So yeah, the middlewares are also good for that. If I think we will talk about something related in a bit. Awesome. Yeah. It's actually not a question, I think. So hopefully it's okay just mentioning. Just if you have one or if you wanted to discuss anything else, just let me know. Then bots. It's very frustrating. If you push your project live, 5 minutes later, you will have a bot trying to contact you. You will have a bot trying to submit whatever you put in a form live. And it's also very annoying if you have this public contact form in your website to go to your mailbox and get 200 emails daily from bots, basically bombarding your site with stupid post, well, whatever, right? I understand you got that problem already because I did, and well, I just put it the number one. How could we mitigate bots submitting to your site? And you will tell me, okay, there is a file, txt file that you can put on the home. Well, they just ignore this kind of polite indications that you don't want to be crawled or you don't want to be attacked by bots, right? So you need to do something in your end, which usually is using Google reCAPTCHA. you can do that. That's totally okay. You are involving Google in your life, right? But that shouldn't be a problem for some of you, and it just works. You work. There are a couple plugins in CakePHP for handling reCAPTCHA, and you just need to configure a token, and it just works, right? Today we're going to do another way around, which is using a honeypot. What is a honeypot? A honeypot is a way to protect your forms, putting a form input, a form control that the bots will use, but you know this is a fake one. So you should not be, if you detect that someone is posting anything to your honeypot, you know that he is a bot, and you discard the request. Okay, so how can we do this? Well, quickly, we can do this through a middleware, and also we need to add this new control in the form, right? So let's go there, and in the honeypot, I'm going to basically use one of the plugins available. I'm looking for the URL here. Composer require. Okay, so copy that. I'm gonna use this middleware under middleware's honeypot. I'm gonna require this one. This is basically allowing me to use a new middleware. It's called the honeypot middleware, and I'm gonna be able to check that for every request. So the next thing I'm gonna do is basically I'm going to add this middleware to my application. First, well, the first thing is I need something to post, right? I will need to basically create a regular form post so I can basically pull those details in a contact form. I'm trying to get to the comment for some reason. Okay, honeypot, good. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a contact action in my users controller. So you go to users controller and creating a new action, public function contact, right? This is a fake function that will only work if we are posting this request is post, right? And I just want to print something in the screen, so I'm gonna just debug and die and post it, right? No problem. So then I need a template for my contact. I'm gonna copy the template because it's not so funny to type. I'm gonna create a new contact PHP under templates, users. No. Templates, users. And here I want to create a new file, contact.php. And I don't care about it. And this is going to be a regular form, right? I'm going to create a form. I don't care about the contents of the form. And I'm going to actually, well, I'm going to add a public message so I can write a message in my contact form. And this is basically injecting a new hidden field, request ID. The name you add here doesn't matter. You can name it FDF, whatever. I'm just using a control name that just looks like a real one, right? Request ID, why not? Then a submit and end, and you get there to your user's contact like that. You write a message and hi, like I'm a bot. I'm a bot. Submit, post it, that thing, because we are missing in our application. We actually want to add the middleware and specify what it's going to be. But what happens here? I don't want to add the middleware to all my requests because I don't want to add this to all my posts. For example, if my form is already behind an authentication, I don't want to add this to all the forms in my application. So I'm going to add it in the routes instead. And the routes you can define here in new scope. Why not? Say routes scope, and I'm going to define a very specific scope for users contact. And this the part of the scope is going to be a function like this one, right? And the scope ends there. So in my routes, I'm going to basically register a middleware first using the builder, register middleware. The name of the middleware is honeypot, right? Well, the name of the middleware. The alias I want to give to the middleware is honeypot, and then I need to create the middleware using new honeypot middleware, and then pass the name of the control I'm going to use, which is request ID in my case, right? Next thing is to apply the middleware. Builder, apply middleware honeypot. And the next thing is to connect a route. In this case, I'm going to connect the route. Instead of using this form, I can use this other form, users contact, right? So there we are. When we get into our application using users contact, I will go through the scope, register a middleware, a honeypot middleware, apply it, and use the users contact controller and action, right? So if we go back to my application, go to contact there, I'm gonna write a message. Let's check that we have a hidden field, a hidden control. Here we have it. You see, we have an input type text name, display none. And what happens if I am a bot and I feel that this is something I should be editing as well? I will usually go and do this value something, right? And then submit. This is a bot submitting. If the bot submits, I get to this page. What is this page? If you look at the log here, this page is now a 403, a forbidden page. So when a bot tries to push something, push trash to your application, it will be intercepted by the middleware, and the middleware will check that there is something in the request ID and block the request. Okay, that's how the honeypot will work. There is a question, will register middleware in the routes override the other middlewares in the application or plugins? Register middleware in the routes override the other middlewares. Well, when you register the middleware, it is using an alias. So it is actually not overriding. It is adding that middleware to the specific queue because the rest of the middlewares are in effect. For example, in this case, if we call users contact, right, we still keep the X response time, which is a middleware we define in the application class. So maybe your problem could be rewriting rewriting the wrong alias, or you have any other configuration issue in this case. There is also a question from Alex. Normally bots will not fill up display non-visibility, which is okay. They already in the plugin, in the honeypot middleware, they already state that, and that is actually a very valid comment. Thank you, Alex. The bots are clever. They will try to understand your page, and they will not fall into typical traps. So you will need to be more, you will need to be more creative in order to stop them. Let me go to the middleware itself. Let me go to the let me go to the URL. You can see other examples there in this specific one. Middleware's honeypot. They actually recommend that you use your own JavaScript and CSS, or basically JavaScript, to hide the control in your code. So the bot will not make those checks as easy, right? Just add your own code. There is get field, get hidden field. Yeah, this might be easier to text, but if you want to be creative, yeah, you just use the get field in combination with some custom CSS and JavaScript. Okay. Hope that answers your question or your comment, but I think it's a very valid one. And you know, bots already are very, very clever sometimes. So this is going to be a trial and error. You'll be adding some of the rules, maybe trying some CAPTCHA, maybe both things, maybe your own honeypot and reCAPTCHA in place to ensure that Google does a very good job. But I've seen previous versions of reCAPTCHA were already bypassed with some of the bots. So maybe a combination of both. And as well, the best approach is not having any public form. If you can get rid of that and use a third-party service for getting your forms posted, that is also a good approach, or could be a good approach. But if you need it, this could help you to stop some of the bots, right? Next thing would be our good old friend SQL injection. You know, we are exposed to SQL injection. We know about it, but sometimes we don't know exactly how or when. For example, if you're working with a CakePHP ORM and you place a variable in the left side of the array, then you are exposed. If you put it on the right side, no, because it's being scaled. If you create a raw expression, you are exposed. If you have a raw query that is not scaled, you are exposed as well. So the ORM or CakePHP or any other tool, they are not going to fix this magically for you in all cases. You need, as a developer, to know how the query is being generated and basically understand if your variables are being scaled or not. So you really understand if you are going to be exposed to a SQL injection attack. For example, you go to, let me create a SQL injection attack vector. So, so we can see, or so you can see what I'm talking about. I'm going to next example, that would be SQL injection. Okay. We have, I'm creating two examples, one with using the ORM, another using a raw query, because sometimes you will have raw queries in your code. So I'm going to get to users controller, and I'm going to create here a new method, search, public function search, allowing you to put something as an email, right? So this function is I'm gonna write it wrong so we can see how the SQL injection could happen. I'm gonna define users as these users find, then I'm gonna use where, and I'm gonna use conditions there inside. And then after the conditions, I'm gonna place users. I'm gonna run the query count, right? And I'm gonna echo the number of users here, right? So how can I write this safely? Well, in this case would be email as email, like this, right? This is safe. Why? Because, well, CakePHP will understand that this is a variable and will escape the variable before injecting into the query. Let's write it in a non-safe way. So email equals, actually, let me change this. Email equals, or like, well, equals is better to use like in this example. So it's going to be email like email, right? And whatever on the right. Good. So like this. So then this is unsafe, obviously, because if I run this query, right, I'm going to say, first, let me check a user, a valid user I have. I have a user with email 1, so I'm going to use user search 1. And I have one user. Well, actually, for this example, let me add a new user, right? User first name 2, last name 2, add example. Password, I don't care. Active, I don't care. Groups, I don't care. So we have 2 users. So if I go back to user search 1, great, we have 1 user. But nobody will stop an attacker to do something like this. Why? What if I search this? Well, if I use that as a search string, then I'm getting 2 users. So this way, I'm actually bypassing you. If you look at the queries, let me do this for looking at it, or let me just enable the query log here. I go to the default. Let me set the log to true. And let me reload the page. So if you look at the query around here, you see this is going to be the query. Select count, count, where email like 1 or 1 equals 1 and whatever is coming after. So we are actually injecting SQL as part of our PHP code. And this is a very common way that attackers will try and check if your application is open to this kind of attacks, and then this could cause a number of issues, like people leaking information they should not be, privilege escalation, well, all kind of nasty things you want to avoid, especially when those queries are related with authentication, right, or authorization. and you are leaving this open to users, right? So this would be the second injection attack type. Is similar or the same as if you use a raw query. When you use a raw query, for example, here, a way to handle this query raw would be this way. I'm gonna paste the example code quickly so we can keep going with this because we are a little bit behind. Okay, so using a raw query would be something like this. Source get connection. Something is weird here and there. Okay, so you can see here, I'm using a raw query. The right way of preventing you getting injection attacks is to basically use or replacing or preparing or escaping those parameters. In this case, we are using execute to prepare that statement, and we are using placeholders for the variables. So those variables are being escaped now if you pass them as an array. This function also accepts another array for defining the types, because some of these variables could be strings or integers or whatever, and you want to be able to define the types. So when you pass the types to your raw query, this is going to be okay, right? You will see this usually in reports in your application where building a very complex query for a report that you are going to have once in your application, maybe in that case, it makes sense to just use a query and not dealing with the ORM at all, which is very useful for other use cases. But at some point, if you already have the query and you just want to run it in a secure way, this could be an approach because you only need this query here. You're not going to reuse anything, or you're not going to compose this query with anything else. It's just a raw query that you need to go to the database, right? So in this case, this could be, well, this is actually users, right? Something like that. And obviously, this was not like this. It was like and email. Oh, we don't need this, but we need the email. I think this should be, right? I may be wrong, but you get the idea, right? Always remember that when you use the ORM and you pass variables on the right side of your word, you're safe. If you try to pass things on the left side, or if you create raw expressions, you're not safe, and you need to be careful escaping those parameters coming from the user land or writing the query in another way. Okay, it would be the second approach, the second case, SQL injection. Then the third one, XSS injection. XSS meaning CSS or JavaScript or any other injection like this type, usually these two. So in this case, and this is a very common attack vector because we tend to forget about doing this. Let's imagine that you have a regular view template, like for example, the user's view page, right? This one. And at some point, instead of doing this, you just write the content out to the view, right? Okay, then a user could try to exploit this approach, basically editing himself and saying, okay, my name is not first name, it's going to be alert I, like this. No, it's going to be script alert hi. Okay, this is going to be my name. So if I save it and now I view it, well, this is number 2, and this one actually. Then I get this, meaning our end user successfully attacked our site, having the ability to run their own JavaScript in our site, maybe injecting an external script. In this case, there are some mitigations you could implement using CSPs and other ways to limit the scripts that are running on your own page. But if you have something like this is gonna be bad, right? How to prevent this type of attacks? Well, first one is escaping everything that is coming from the user land. And the second is even if you try to escape it, there are some still some attack vectors. So my recommendation would be to check one of these cheat sheets like this one for cross-site scripting, and you will see here a very short list. Here you go down. Very simple. Let me copy the URL for you there. And you will see that here rules, right? Never encode, encode, encode. Okay, this is okay for encode, but some other placements are just a no. Like for example, rule never put untrusted data here, never put untrusted data here, never put. So you have some basic rules here for you to remember that not even escaped, just don't put anything untrusted, right? Unless you want to have an open XSS attack vector in your application. And this alone is not very well. It could be very dangerous because they could use this to steal cookies or inject other external scripts. Okay, there is a question in Slack. Is the mass assignment attack vector mitigated in current CakePHP versions? Mass assignment. I have no idea. I would need to take a look at this. Maybe we can chat about this later in Slack and describe me better what is this attack vector, so I'm able to take a look at it. Okay. I need to check that. Okay, so we can discuss about this specific attack later on. Hopefully that is going to be okay with you. For this one, the other one we are talking about, this XSS can be very dangerous in combination with other attacks they can do on your side, or if if you're not careful, you could end up with a very big logo of whatever faction in the internet in your homepage, or any other harmful attack for your own identity, right? For your company identity. So next would be DDoS attacks, especially useful if your stack is not optimized. So they could be very harmful, especially if your stack is already heavy, if you're doing a lot of queries in your homepage, if you're doing, if you're accessing third parties or additional logging or other heavy processes in your public pages, because a competitor, for example, could get a server and start smacking your site and see what happens, right? What's going to happen? What if I try to open this beautiful page with a lot of resources that obviously are dynamic 1,000 times a second? Is the server going to crash? Or there is another question. What about HTML editors? For example, TinyMCE, CK Editor. Do I need to prevent, do some check for this? Yes, of course. Of course. And the first reaction would be if you can skip working with HTML at all, that would be great. Some people try to do this, for example, using Markdown and storing Markdown in the database. So this Markdown is then parsed into HTML when you generate your view. So you're adding like another barrier for an attacker to understand how they can inject code in your application. The second approach would be to sanitize the code when you get it into the database and when you get it out. There is an HTML library, HTML purifier, if I'm not wrong, that can be used for this. That it does an aggressive filtering of the tags you don't want to have in your HTML. But yes, 100%, you need to be very careful when using any WYSIWYG editor in your front end, because you're basically, especially if you allow them to inject code, right? Like edit code, and then I can put there whatever I want. Well, this whatever I want could be another user trying to hack your site, or an existing user, or a sad user trying to make your life harder, right? Like injecting some code or ads or whatever, right? And anything, it's not, you're not gonna like it. So it's better to strongly sanitize whatever content coming from WYSIWYG editors and allow only very small amount of tags that you can control. Maybe you want to allow them to tweak the style, or add a strong italic or whatever other type of styling to. Well, if that's the case, that is fine. But yeah, that's a good question. Very dangerous, and you need to handle them properly, right? And every time you put it into the database and out, right? Because you don't want to have you don't want to trust that content by mistake, maybe in another place of your application, like in a shell or something, right? So hopefully that answers the question. And DDoS, we were talking about how easy and how cheap it is for a competitor to detect that you have a heavy research-based website and they want to get you down. So then they start smacking your public endpoints until you run out of resources, right? It's cheaper for them. If it is cheaper for them than for you, we have a DDoS attack vector open to your site. So how can we handle those types of attacks? The first option would be to let others do it for you. Cloudflare, Akamai, CloudFront, and others, they provide a CDN that you can configure in front of your site, and they do have protection for DDoS. So they have a much better way to handle this traffic, especially when the traffic comes from many different sources at the same time, right? If you are a target of a very well placed attack, the do-it-yourself is not going to be an option in this case, unless you have the knowledge in the IT and the network, so you can place your own defensive barrier. Okay. But for us, for today, we're going to do an example, which is a do-it-yourself example, where we are going to use, again, a middleware, which is the Muffin Throttle middleware to detect those attacks. Right now, if you see, this is my site there on top. If I go to an attacker machine and I do siege HTTP localhost 8099, if I do this, you see here, I'm bombarding my on-site. Let me stop. Bombarding my on-site and getting a lot of pages and returning all those pages, right? I'm returning all those, well, 1,000 or how many, 2,000 times, right? Well, we could do something to prevent this type of naive attacks to your sites if you use something like the throttle middleware, which is something I'm going to do now. Let me go there and install the middleware first, and then configure the middleware. It's nothing. Oh yeah. So composer require nothing to throttle. There we are. Then if you take a look at the configuration of the plugin, take a look at this here. There we are. You see here, you can configure, well, composer require, you need to load the plugin. Let's load the plugin. And then you need to add a configuration. Basically, the default configuration is using a CPU cache engine that we are going to create. So go there, source, no, config, application. We get to the configuration for the different engines, top there, and we add a new one like this. You can use anything you want, but well, ACPU looks fine as a cache engine for this task because it will use RAM for storing the. It will use the ACPU PHP extension that will basically store this in memory, so you will have it accessible from any of the processes sharing that ACPU, which is one per PHP FPN node, right? So, well, you could think about having something to collect all the data, but we are talking about a DDoS attack, so it should be something very quick, right? Like ACPU. So then we go there and we try again. Oh, sorry. We need to ensure that the middleware is loaded again. So we go there to the application, and I'm gonna check that the middleware is loaded, or load the middleware basically. Throttle middleware. Okay, like this. If you go back and check the documentation, you know here that you can create the throttle middleware, configure the response, how you want it, the period of time, the limit, and also the identifier, right? In this case, I think it's good to have this identifier in place. So if we are, this identifier is basically a callback to say, okay, how can I define every request coming in? So we are going to ensure that if it is an API request and it has a bearer token, we will basically allow every single authenticated user a number of different requests, a different slot, right? So we are not going to consider those users as public users, right? In this case, if we load the middleware this way, we will be able to then go back here, run siege, and then at some point, you see, at some point, we are stopping to get 200, and we are getting 429, which is too many requests. So if someone's trying to take us down with some very simple method, like the one I just used, you can detect that condition and you can just start serving I'm sorry, that's just too much for today, or that's just too much for the next hour, right? You need to slow down, right? Well, that's also a way to handle DDoS attacks. But if you need to handle this properly, you possibly need others to do it, unless you have the knowledge in-house. Then we have CSRF type attacks. What is a CSRF type attack? Is when they force you or they trick you to do something in another site and you are already logged in. Because you are already logged in the other site, you just use your existing session and you do an action that you didn't want to do, right? I'm going to, even if I am a little bit over for this section, I'm going to take some time here to try to explain with a real example, because this is always a struggle when you configure the application to make it work properly. And it is important that also there is an explanation of the reason, because this is a very easily exploitable um, attack vector in applications, and we need to be careful about them, right? The next one is just other references. So this is going to be the last example in the security subsection of the workshop. So let me do that. The first thing is we are going to create an exploit, or we are going to create a script with an example for an CSRF attack. If we go to the web root here, web root, new, and say csrf.html, then we can get this in, right? Okay, I'm just gonna copy the whole code and explain, because again we are a little bit over time. So the key part of the attack is this one, right? This csrf.html is something you put in your eval site. It's not something you obviously, it's not something you put on your own site. The attacker will create an HTML page with this content, right? Instead of this, you will have a URL. This URL is harder to attack, right? Because it will always affect one user. But some sites, they do have something like this, right? My. So if you post to this page, you will change your own profile. In that case, this is a more dangerous attack vector, because all the users clicking here would be changing their profile. In this case, all the users clicking here, you need to be lucky and push this attack only to user ID 1, because he's the only one that will work. The other users are going to be captured by authorization and the attack won't work, right? But if you look at the form, you have here a form. Remember, we are in an eval external site, okay, not our local host, just another one. But I can put the URL to your site here. I can put something there on the right, and I can say, okay, I'm going to try to make you change your email in your profile. So your email is changed to my address. And then having your email address, I can click on remember password and steal your account. Or I can click on whatever two-factor authentication if I'm using two-factor authentication email-based, and try to steal your token or do some other fancy stuff that you don't like to happen in your site. Then I'm adding this. So every time I visit this page, I automatically submit this one, right? So what happens then? First, now I am a user, right? I am a user of your site. I log in, username, password, I'm logged in. I have a session that is active, and someone sent me an email. Click here to claim your coupons, whatever. right? I click there, then I go to this page. Localhost, CSRF, HTML. I go to this page and oh, doesn't exist. Nice. 99. No, it's not HTTPS. It's HTTP localhost. Aha. So if I go to that page, you see I'm getting an error. And the error I'm getting is because I am already protected to these type of attacks by default in the application template or the application skeleton that CakePHP generates. But what happens if I get annoyed about the CSRF configuration and do this, which is something that you could end up doing at some point, maybe. If you just don't want to keep configuring and making it work, you just get bored about it and say, okay, I don't need this. Let's get rid of it. Then what happens is, automatically, the attack gets in, and the email of the user is now changed. So if I do this inside of an iframe, I might not even notice that my account was saved. Keep in mind, I'm not doing this. I'm not trying to hide what just happened, right? But attackers will hide this in iframes. They will put content on top or whatever to try to just hide that the post went through and you changed your user. And once the user is changed, again, they can use their email to reset your password or to do any other things in the system, whatever things are evil. Yeah, and you don't want that to happen. Okay, it would be for a CSRF attack. Hopefully, obviously there are a lot of additional explanations and a lot of details that you can follow in these other references. There are some references for PHP security. I would recommend you to take a look at. There are also some static analysis tools that could help you to review your code for security. And there are third-party tools allowing you to review your code as well for security pitfalls or problems, right? So the security is always is always there in all the applications you put live. So sooner or later, when the application gets relevant, somebody will try to attack it. And if this is your case, well, you need to. So the question would be, CSR also blocks iframe, right? However, is it possible for us to allow only one URL to pass through the CSRF so that it works for iframes from that URL? Again, the attack you see here was very naive, right? I just tried to design a very plain attack so you can see the way it works. That's the basic. But then those CSRF attacks are using browser vulnerabilities or issues, are using operating system vulnerabilities or issues, so they can sneak in these kind of attacks without you noticing those. Browsers are doing a very good job at detecting those attacks and blocking them, which is good. But this type of attack will continue existing as long as they are session-based, session-based. As long as the session is there and you are already authenticated, there will be other people trying you to click or submit actions into other sites, especially if a vulnerability is there for them to exploit. Okay, I don't know if that answers your question. Again, if you go to the OWASP page, there is a huge reference on other tricks that they use to hide those post requests. So yeah, you will see there. Okay, so performance in cache. We have 1 hour ahead of us. So we have ahead performance in cache and also the event system. I'm going to cover performance in cache. The event systems maybe not so useful as this one, but I will let you choose. If you want me to cover both, let me know. I can rush a little bit on performance and cache and try to cover both sections or both mini blocks inside of the first workshop. If you want me to cover performance and cache in deep, I can do that as well and leave events. Right. Yeah. Well, that's it. Both. Okay. I'll try to rush a little bit in performance and cache. Again, anything we don't cover today, and I know that this was going to be a thing because I'm sorry, but I always prepare like for 2 workshops. Uh, no problem. I'm gonna take a training session next week or next week, and we're gonna cover all the items that we didn't cover today. Okay, it's gonna be one of these 2 bucks registration training sessions. So everybody's invited. Okay, we'll tweet about it when the session is ready. So if you like these contents, you will have them because they are already prepared. So would not be fair to deliver, right? So let me try to rush. First, bottlenecks. How to de- how to detect the bottlenecks in your application. Again, you can either do it yourself or let others do it. And notable providers for let others do it: Sentry, New Relic, and others. So there are many right now. Those providers usually install some APM or agent in your PHP as an extension, and or they trace the execution of your application, and then they send logs to a central server, and then you go to the service, pay for it. They offer free tires as well, but at some point you will need to pay, and you get good information about what's going on in your application, hopefully, right? The other way is do it yourself, and do it yourself could be as complex as you want. For me, detecting bottlenecks is usually the first place is debug it. So you go to your site. Let me get rid of this. You go to your site, for example, this page, users view 1. You get to this page, you click on it, you get to the timer, and here you will see time per location or per process inside your cake application. But most importantly, this thing here. What I typically do is to review all the queries here generated in the request, because some of these queries we will be lacking, for example, proper indexes, or some of these queries are bringing too much information, maybe a lot more information that the data I need to render the page. So in this case, it is a good indicator of an optimization. If you look at the rows, if the rows are too high, maybe you need additional filters on your query, or to look at the milliseconds. Usually in your development environment, this is always going to be low. So another approach would be to build a database with a good number of records. You can use the migrations seed or some other database tools for building fake data that you can use on your tables. So you can actually see how your database is going to behave with more data in it, right? This is usually my first stop place for checking, looking at the queries. Obviously, if you open this here and you see more than 50 queries, then that's not looking good. Because if every request to this page is going to trigger 50 queries to my database, just stacking all those queries, the if the database is not in its best day, if you add 1 millisecond to each, it's going to be 50 milliseconds on top of whatever request you're working with, which is a lot of time. And that is talking about only 1 millisecond. If we're talking about 10, well, you do the math. So this could be the first place I would use for checking potential bottlenecks in the application. In my experience, performance issues are in the database or in the assets, usually. PHP is pretty fast dealing with anything, unless you have a poorly designed architecture, like you're having an n+1 queries problem or any other architectural design that is flawed. Unless you're in that situation, usually your problems are coming either for a bad query or a slow query, for your assets loading very slowly, or for a third-party service like an API or something that is not so fast. Okay? So how to detect those other issues? You can use Xdebug, and this is something that I had here for covering, maybe because this is not so related with performance. I'm going to skip this one, which is using Xdebug for step-by-step debugging in the application. If you're interested, we'll see that one in the training session. But you can also use Xdebug for profiling. Let me do that real quick. In your container, in my case, I'm using a container. But in your case, you need to install the Xdebug extension for the PHP version that you're using. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable Xdebug for profiling and for debugging this way. Let me copy that this way. And also, I'm going to add some proper configuration for Xdebug so we can actually send the profiling output somewhere else. Copy that here. So you can see I'm adding two environment parameters, one for enabling the modes, debug and profile. We're not going to debug today, but we're going to profile. And the second parameter is to set the output directory to something, to somewhere I like, and also refer. This is going to be used for the debug mode and not for the profiling. For profiling, we only need this parameter. So once you set up Xdebug this way, one thing you can do is, well, you actually need to restart your containers. So the environment will be in effect, and you will be getting the new Xdebug based extension. You will see that Xdebug is enabled because it's complaining about stuff here. No problem. And then you can go to your site and say, okay, this page. There are many ways to enable a header in the request. There is an extension that I use, which is this one, to basically enable a profile header. If you run it, you get here a new file. If you look at the TMP files, you see now you have this two files here, cache drained out, cache drain. So This is a file with a lot of data in it, megabytes. Could be very, very big depending on your project. So there is a tool available for all the major operating systems. In my case, it's called Cache Grind. Cache Grind, and I can do it with TMP and Cache Grind, whatever. This one, for example, right? So this will generate an interface like this one, where you can actually see all the things happening in your PHP stack. For example, the time grouped by function cycle, right? This function cycle, you can see here all the calls to all the functions and all the classes happening in your project, and say, okay, this auto-load include file is taking a lot of time, obviously, because the controller, our project is basically empty. So the auto-loading of the classes uh, will take a lot of time comparatively with the rest of the code that we have. But you can see calls to your own code. You will see calls to your own code and around there under application. Well, result set. Well, you get the idea, right? You can structure, or you can filter by source file, by class. This is about grouping. And then if you double click, you usually be able to navigate and see everybody calling a specific function, or well, the map for a given caller. Well, a lot of details that will provide you for those people interested in fine tuning and saying, okay, my PHP code is very slow and I don't know why. Then you can get to one of these tools and see exactly which one is gonna which method is gonna be the slow method, that the one you need to optimize, right? Because it will display a lot of useful information and all the okay, there's another question. How about Blackfire or Tideways? Yes, they are great providers. I tried Blackfire and liked it. Tideways, no, I never tried that. But I tried or used Sentry, um, um, New Relic, and Blackfire. I did for testing, right? But I have more personal experience with Sentry and New Relic. But yeah, all these tools are awesome, fantastic. So, but here's the do-it-yourself method. You have a way to check your queries. You have a way to check your PHP code in a very detailed way using those profiling and tracing options. So if you're really into performance, you can use these tools to get to the last millisecond or nanosecond used in your project. Yeah. That's for the feedback. Typical performance tips for your production environment. Well, ensure that queries are fast. And check your queries again. Ensure that your assets load fast, like through a CDN, minify, group, cache, reduce, and remove. Uh, it doesn't matter how you optimize. If you have a 4 megabytes JavaScript file already compressed, your application is going to be slow. So at some point, you will need to decide if you keep using all those fancy libraries, or if you use another way of loading those assets. Nowadays, with front-end frameworks, they optimize and they load only the chunks they need. Well, there are many techniques that we are not getting into. This one is a commonly change, or a very common change that we do on production environments, which is removing all the file system access. Logs should not go to a file system. Logs should go to a central log or syslog. Session should not be written into a disk. Session should go possibly to a Redis or Memcache central location. all the cache engines, they should not go to the file system. They should go to Redis or Memcache when possible, right? Also, do not use sessions if they are not needed. For example, in the homepage, if you don't have anything in the homepage, depending on the session, do not use or do not print flash messages, because then you're going to tell the Cake framework, okay, I might be using a session here in this page, or I'm reading something from the session, so start a session. But if you don't need a session in your homepage, which is something that in a lot of the pages you can skip, and your homepage is getting a lot of traffic, one option could be just removing the session overall. The same with your assets, and well, considering a cache layer, and we are going to talk about caching now. So I'm gonna work on a caching example, hopefully over the next 15 minutes, and then I'm gonna skip a lot of things here, other things related with sorry, it was around here, right? I'm gonna skip all these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things, which are all optional, as you can see here, right? So we can see and work and discuss about a simple caching scenario that is not naive, right? Because talking about caching is talking about invalidation. Caching things is super fast, super easy, no problem. The problem is invalidating the cache. And the naive approach is always just remove everything, or just remove all the keys you have in the engine. Okay, I want to catch users. Okay, every time a user changes, remove all the users, which is fine. This method works, but you need to ensure that users are going to be read much more than written. If you write a lot of users and you read a lot of users, you're going to spend a lot of time invalidating the cache, and the cache is not going to be so useful. So this approach, the naive approach, like just delete all the keys, will work in some situations, okay? We're going to try and check, we're going to imagine a situation where we cannot just delete everything, right? We just need to, we need to be careful with what keys we delete the cache. And this is going to be the example. Let's say we're going to try and cache users view. If you go to users controller, view action, there, we're going to try to cache, well, we are going to actually cache this case. So cache in this case means, okay, when any of the data that is cached, what are the variables that I need to watch to invalidate that specific key? In this case, we are retrieving all the data from the users, but also containing the groups. So if something changes in the users table row, or in any of the associated groups, or in the association, because this is a belongs to many association. So if anything changes in the intermediate in the association table, we need to invalidate the affected keys, right? So explaining myself again. Let's work on the example first. I'm gonna cache this right away. I'm gonna start caching, saying, okay, this is not anymore, but instead I'm gonna use user. I'm gonna do cache remember. Cache remember. And I need to generate a key for it. And I'm gonna have a function, right? And this function should return something. Return something, right? Returning something will be the result of the user. So obviously we need to return the query, right? Return. Right? So for returning the query, we need to use the ID. So we need to pass the ID down to the column. Good. And now we just need to generate a key for this. The key could be something like key. It's going to be user underscore the ID. Why not? Right? So now we're going to cache everything returned by this query into a key. In this case as well, we're going to define a specific configuration because we don't want to cache things in the default cache. We want to have more control about where are we caching the user configuration. So we are creating a new configuration. We can go then and configure this out here in the app. The same way we added a throttle. Well, I'm gonna actually copy this one. Right, and change this to users. This prefix would be users, path, I don't care, serialized, duration, I don't care. And the URL, obviously, need to define it. Cake users cache users URL. Okay, good. So this is what we have now for the users. So if I go back to my page and I click on users view, I'll get this, right? If you see, there is a, well, I need to make this bigger actually. Sorry about that. If you go to the cache here, the cache tab, you see that we now have a new engine. And in this page, we got a miss and we got a set. You can see the log here. We are basically setting the user. And if you look at it, because we are using the file system, you can actually list the cache keys that you have. You have this one, right? User one. If you look at the contents, no big deal. It's going to be a serialized object representing the user and the groups that you just got from, well, actually it's a hacked user, no problem. So we get that into the cache. So if we reload the page again, you will see that now we are not doing any query to the database, but the result is the same. And obviously, if we edit this user and change this to Joe and save it, we keep seeing the same because we are not invalidating the cache. Good. So let's invalidate the cache. How can we, or what would be the strategy for invalidating this cache? We would need to first carefully think, what are the variables, the input variables that we have here in this function? Here to the users controller, you need to carefully understand what are the variables that we have, that we are using inside of this method. The only variable apparently in this case would be the ID, right? And then all the changes done to the users in database, to the groups in database, or users groups in database would affect the result. So we need to invalidate when anything coming from the database is going to affect the result we're going to have. So we need to capture when a user changes. We need to capture when a group changes, because in any of those cases, we need to invalidate all the relevant users. Let's do that. You can do that right away in the tables. I'm going to create a behavior so you can see this, how that works in a specific class. So I'm going to bake a new behavior, bake behavior, and I'm gonna call it invalidate users, right? So we have the behavior, new one there. we have a new behavior, model, behavior, validate users. So what is this behavior going to do? This behavior is going to detect, we want to apply the same behavior to both places, to users and groups. When it detects a change in users, it will invalidate the user with the ID. When it detects a change in groups, it will invalidate all the relevant groups. So then I know, yeah, we are a little bit, let me just paste the code here so you can see the reference of what I'm talking about. And I will try to explain it so we can get to the events quickly. There. The user. Okay. There are many ways of doing this. I'm trying to write the code in a way that is simple to understand. We could use the event system as we are gonna do later on to remove these functions. But for now, let's imagine we have this invalidate user's behavior. We are gonna have an after save callback and an after delete callback. Both after save and after delete will use this invalidate function. The invalidate function will cover two cases. It could be a user. In this case, we are going to delete the user with the same key from the user's configuration. The second case, it could be a group. In this case, we are going to grab the original IDs and the current IDs of the group change. So, and all the user IDs will be basically the merging all those IDs we had before and after. I'm going to explain this a little later when we are in the interface. And then for all the IDs, we are going to delete the relevant users. So what's going to happen then? Let me add the invalidate users behavior to both tables. Let me go to the model table, users table, and let me add the behavior. Invalidate users here and to the groups. There. So if we go to a user now, this one, for example, and we edit the user, and I'm going to change the name to Jim, right? When I save it, if you look at it now in the history, this was the save operation. I'm using the history to go back in time and then check what happened at the cache layer. You can see there that we just deleted one entry, one key in the users engine. And if you go down, you see we are deleting user one, which is the one I'm editing. So if I go back to users and click on view, now I need to generate again the entry in a cache. So when I get to the user, the data is fresh coming from the database, and I get the real data, right? So for the end user, this could be a valid behavior. So I don't need to care. I don't care if the data is coming from the database or the cache, as long as it is valid for me, right? Here's a question. What about caching whole generated output? Isn't that better than just caching SQL results? Yes, it could be a good approach as well, depending on the number of variables you have in the page. We actually have an example that I'm going to skip, but we have an example here to write an initial or a very naive full cache middleware that you can use to cache the entire body of your response. So for some pages, maybe this could be a useful approach, and you can cache all the generated page. You can also use element or cells to cache in CakePHP very easily. They already have a cache key usually in their configuration, so you can just pass the engine you want to use to cache and the key, and CakePHP handle internally the generation of the HTML and the caching in the specific um, engine in this case, right? So this could be also an option, and it's a very good option if you want to cache HTML, because uh, it usually works very well. For example, for caching content that is related, it is invalidated by time. For example, top 10 results, or latest searches, or well, you get it, right? So this kind of use is very, very useful for caching, because also you can control when the cache is regenerated. You could build your own shell, for example, or cron you have. So the cache lasts 24 hours maybe. So you can generate a shell to refresh the cache every 24 hours. So the first user visiting the page does not need to pay the price for rebuilding all the content coming from the database, but just every user will just get cached data super fast, right? That could be an approach. But we're skipping this one, sorry. And going back to invalidation, yeah, this is it. The same way in the groups. And in this case, let me go to my groups page. Groups. If you remember, let me add a group there. Why not? To this user. So let's say I want to, well, let me add a user then. Oh, sorry. Let me add another user, 3 at example.com. Password, I don't care. Group 1. Okay, so let me now go to the first group, group 1. Group 1. You. Oops. And you see we have 2 related users. So if I edit the group and I now grab all the users and submit, what he's going to do is basically, because of the groups I'm changing, all those groups are being detected and all the potential cache keys are being deleted. So the next time I load user 3, 2, or 1, the associated groups changed. So it makes sense that the user information changed as well in the cache, because we are containing groups. As you can see, this is a fairly complex logic for a very simple case, right? It's a fairly complex logic, and I'm just reading a user containing a group. So you can imagine that the caching or the cache layer could become very complex over time. So it's always good that you review that layer, because sometimes it's just better to not cache and pull data directly from the database. And if you keep your invalidation rules fairly simple, that's great. But if they get too complicated, then that's going to be a pain to maintain and to work with. But sometimes, like this time, for example, if let's imagine the groups and the users change not so much or not so frequently, and you have a lot of requests going to users view, then it makes a lot of sense to have a layer like this one in front of your application. Keep in mind, you can change the engine and put this in memory or put this in a Redis server. That is going to be super fast. Okay. So then hopefully, if you have questions about this, we'll discuss those questions later on, because in the last 20 minutes, I would like to cover the event system, doing a very simple example, working on a notifications plugin. that you can create to attach some features based on events to your application. So let's do that. I'm gonna get and work on an example here. Let me skip a couple of slides and get to the event system. There it is. So pros and cons of using events in your applications. Pros, well, you see, we remove hard-coded dependencies. We allow using an observer pattern where many different places get notified when something change in your application through an event we can dispatch at some point. And they are deeply integrated into the framework. This is another pro because you can use those events to fine tune or tweak how the framework works. And also this is used in many plugins as well. So a lot of plugins out there, they use events to allow you expose their internal workflow so you can inject things before something happens or after something happens. So this is extremely useful in the case of a plugin that you're building that you want to expose to others so others are able to tweak it. But we have cons as well, and they are not, you can change this to that, and they are not trivial, which is events are harder to understand and harder to debug. So how can we build something and then mitigate the cons, right? Let's do an example. Let's create a notifications plugin that will send a warning email to an administrator when a file is tagged as a virus. We can bake a new plugin, cake bake plugin notifications. Why am I creating a plugin? To show you that using events, well, you will see a lot of output like this. Those are warnings because of Xdebug, but you don't need to worry about that. Baking a plugin like this will allow you to change the behavior of your application, not touching your application. So in the future, if I don't like this notifications plugin and I remove the plugin entirely, I don't have to modify any single line of code in my application. I just remove the plugin itself and my application will keep working the same it was before, okay? So adding this will be basically 3 steps. The first one will be ensuring that the plugin gets loaded. Well, it should be loaded now. And let me go and check it here in Bootstrap. I am loading the notifications plugin, right? Usually this will be better at the end. And this is actually a modification done in CakePHP 4.3. Only because of this, it's a good reason to upgrade to 4.3. So okay, so we are going to ensure one question I see sometimes in Slack channel, where should I define or where should I configure my events? I usually configure the events in a file. My application events, I usually configure them there in a file and load. No, Juan Pablo, I was reading that one of the 4.3 new features was to place the add plugin line at the end of the Bootstrap, not at the beginning. So that's a nice feature for me. So then I was talking about Augusto Ferreira raised hand. Just put your question there in the chat. It's gonna be so I can read it and I'll answer on the fly. So then we have a new plugin, notifications. What I was talking about is the default way I usually load the events. I usually create here a new file. Now this one, events .php. And then I load all the events in my application here, whatever, right? And I load, I tend to require or include this file from inside of the Bootstrap, right? Events.php, right? This could be include or require, better require, right? So that's easy and allows you to have one place to define all the events in a plain file. But sometimes, like this one, we will have a plugin, and we want to actually define those events in the plugin because we want the plugin to hook those events when it is loaded, when it is added to my application. So a good placement for those type of events would be inside of the plugin itself, inside of the plugin, notifications, and then inside notifications, we could add that to the plugin class, source, plugin class. Then the plugin class has a bootstrap method, and we can actually, the same way we use other functions to hook things inside of the application, we can use the bootstrap to load the events. And that's actually what we are going to do. Let me find a code I have here, copy it on the plugin. There it is. Yeah, we can define a setup listeners function there, and then create protected function stop listeners, right? And then the setup listeners will basically handle the creation of all the events, and this is basically the I think the most important part of the code I'm going to write now. For all the events, we usually create something like this, something like that will describe how this event or why this event makes sense for us or is created. It's usually a verbose documentation like this that will describe what's the event manager that you're using to listen, what's the name of the event, when the event happens. In this case, I'm using one of the CakePHP core events. By the way, I have a couple of references here for you. One reference is the list of all the events that you can get, right? I think I have it somewhere. Let me look for that in my notes, because that's a good reference of all the events. You can get all the table-based events in the book, in the table, of course. Yeah, Casey is asking about the slides. They are actually available now. They are in speaker deck, but I'll put the links there later for reference in the Slack channel. So yeah, you can download the slides or the code or database and play with that yourself. And also the recordings are going to be available. Okay, looks like the link is not working yet. So I'm going to change that. Possibly I created a link as private and it's not published yet, but I promise I'll publish that after the talk. Okay. Then what I was about to say was related with reference to the events. There are two references I usually check for the event. One is the source code, where you can actually see that. So when this happens, well, you can go there to vendor, CakePHP, and look for it. And then you will see that basically it happens there. Okay. So you see the model after save happens right there. Here in this method, in the on save success, is where the framework is dispatching the model after save. And you see that this dispatch function is accepting an array with two keys. First, the entity, and then options, right? So then when you create a listener for the event, you need to ensure that these are the parameters that you are going to accept. In this case, the listener will be something like this. Let me write an anonymous listener here in the plugin class. Show you. Well, sorry for the cows. The other reference I always check in these cases that is also very useful is there is a project here from the Aromark, which is the sandbox. The Aromark sandbox. Okay, this sandbox project here has execution order application. This is a project that you can run locally, and here the results with all the different callbacks that and the name or well, the callbacks in order that are being executed by different actions while you run. For example, model save, model validate and save. You go there, controller action. This is an event name. Then you get to before rules, after rule, da 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 da, and all these different functions will give you the order. So then you can track better the order of execution and then identify the events. Sometimes this is very useful, and I thank you there, Omar, for doing it. So then the other way around is to go to the book. Or in the table, there is table after save. There is table objects, and then you have all the different events that you can listen here for a table, and the same for other classes, right? You can find them in the book just if you want. So for now, we are listening to model after save for a specific event manager. We want to listen into a specific event manager, not a global event, but calls to or dispatching this event in a specific table. So this is what we are going to do. I'm going to load the table, tag table. To be able to load the model, I need to use here model aware trait. This is going to change, but for now, we use model aware trait. Then I want to get a reference to the event manager, right? Let me help my IDE to autocomplete this way. Oops. Okay. Good. So we are getting an event. We are getting the event manager. Oh, the problem was this one. We're getting the event manager, and then I'm going to register, or I'm going to link a new event using on. So when you do on, you need to pass the name of the event. This is going to be the event. Then you can pass an array of options or nothing. And then you can pass a function or a listener. I'm going to use a function. I'm going to use a callable because I don't want to define a listener in this case. And this is where this function comes in. And you will ask, okay, which parameters do I need to put here in the function? Well, the parameters are going to be always, the first parameter will be an event. So event, event, cake event. The second parameter, well, the rest of the parameters will be reading the dispatch. So you can go there and read the dispatch, and you see we are going to have an entity and then an array of options. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to pass here an entity. We positively know that the entity is going to be a tagged entity. So tagged entity, I'm going to call it tagged, and an array of options. I don't care about the options actually, so that's okay for me. So what's this event going to do? This event is going to do, let me copy the code because I have 2 minutes. So I can at least explain what I wanted to do. I don't care about the mailer right now, right? So what is this event going to do? Every time the tagged table event manager is dispatching a model after save event, I'm going to check if I am tagging a file, and I'm going to check, well, if I don't have a tag for it, I'm gonna load a tag, and I need to use tag table, right? If I don't have a tag, because I could not have a tag already in my entity, so I'm going to ensure that it is loaded. This is kind of a lazy loading of the tag. And if the tag is not virus, then I do nothing, right? But if the tag is virus, then I will send an email. I'm not going to spend the time on writing the mailer because that is actually not related with the event system at all. But imagine that this line of code will send an email. Okay, so that's how you can hook something. In this case, we did something else, which is using a plugin for auto hooking events in your application that are related, that are consumed by your plugin. So later on, if you want to change the implementation of the plugin, in this case notifications, or if you want to change to another plugin, you can just swap one plugin with another, and your application will be untouched. Okay, hopefully that is an interesting application of the event system, as you can see. Okay, I see we are on time, so there's a lot of content still. Again, I'm going to be available the rest of the day in Slack for discussion. It was a pleasure to be here with you today. Really, really glad to be here this year. Hopefully next year we can see in person. And yeah, just let me know if you have any feedback. I'm going to be more than happy to try to help you in your CakePHP adventures.